Sam and Bill, I want to jump back into the conversation because the last thing I want to ask you about is the connection between religion and health. And it's the third installment in this series, Sam. And I want to kind of ask you to sort of describe the health challenges we're facing in this country now, and then sort of bring in, again, what you found in your paper and what you argue for, that why religion can be a protective factor for some of the problems we're experiencing on the health front.
Sure. So this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart because I see this with my students, and I see it on so many college and university campuses, which tend to have young people who overwhelmingly define themselves as atheist or agnostic, or as we talked about earlier, and Bill's absolutely right. They'll say they're Catholic or some form of Protestant or even Jewish, but that doesn't mean anything. They simply identify as such, but are basically isolated. And the fact of the matter is that we in this nation are facing a crisis of loneliness. People feel alone. They feel disconnected. They feel like they don't have folks to turn to. The report is very deep on that. Concurrently, they are addicted to these horrible machines here, and they are increasingly becoming more and more narrow and radicalized and isolated based on various algorithms that are, quite frankly, messing with their heads, for lack of a better way of saying it. One of the strongest anecdotes that I can give, if I were a therapist and had a prescription pad, which does not exist anymore in most places, I would write, join a synagogue, join a church, go to services. Again, not because of the prayer themselves. And the prayer, incidentally, and the report goes into great detail about awe and the value of prayer. So that's definitely there. But the immediate effect that you would get beyond just the ritual and the value of thinking about God in scripture is, again, as we talked about, the community. When you are immersed in a community, you begin to feel seen, you begin to feel heard. Those feelings of isolation are much lower because you can't disappear. You're not going to be allowed to disappear. At some point, people might say, where is so and so? Is so and so okay? Can we check up on him or her? The idea that you are, just an atom floating in space no longer really exists when you are part of these communities, these congregations. The health and well-being factor really rises very quickly because rather than being isolated and alone, you always have someone to turn to. And it's not just a member of the clergy. It can be a member of the lay staff and the lay leadership. It can be someone who looks like you or sounds like you with a similar background. As we talked about earlier, many people have had similar problems in life. And you can feel like, hey, there's someone to talk to. When let's say you're a dad and you're struggling with being a good husband or a good father, to someone, you can talk to many other men in the congregation and the community about that. It's not a therapy session, it's a social session. And when you have those sorts of experiences, you walk out feeling like, again, you matter and you're part of something. The benefits to faith and the community associated with faith on health and well being are hard to overstate. I wish that I could figure out a way to get everyone into one of these communities because I think if that were the case, our crisis of loneliness would be abated fairly quickly. Then the second part of health and well-being is that, again, we are in a world increasingly looking down. We're looking at our phones, we're looking at screens. We're not looking out, and we're certainly not looking up toward the heavens. Faith helps recenter that. Faith helps us recognize awe, recognizes small moments that are beautiful, whether it's you're in a synagogue and you're disconnected from everything and the sun hits the window of the stained glass just at the right time, and then you go, oh my God. Or you're out taking a hike somewhere in a mountain and you see something as small as a bird or grand vista. Faith helps us center that. Faith helps us recognize, again, where we are in the grand scheme of things. And the report goes into detail about both factors, both the social component, but also the spiritual and sort of religious component as well. So we haven't talked too much about the religious side of it, but in this case, faith really does improve health and well-being socioculturally as well as spiritually.
Sam, are there any particular data points that stood out to you in your research on this that are striking? And I'm wondering in particular if anyone out there is listening to this and if they're kind of skeptical, that if they might say, well, some of the narratives in mainstream news coverage these days or on social media implies that religion is actually bad for your mental health. It may be in ways because it conflicts with other kind of modern secular narratives about a life and those kinds of things. So are there data points that can help refute that? What did you find that you think, well, this is actually pretty compelling in the evidence that makes a case for what you're saying?
So there's no question that faith can be dangerous, and I wouldn't suggest that it isn't. There are obviously some, but very small numbers of folks who become radicalized. Obviously, sometimes it becomes too cocooned and too inward looking, but that is the exception, not the norm. And we see that over and over again. Most faiths are open. Most faiths are intended to look into the public sphere and to be inclusive and to be welcoming. I would say to any listener, if you come to New York, email me, write me. I will take you into my synagogue anytime, ask anything, see anything. And if you are a stranger, there may even be a race to who greets you at the door that says welcome and who invites you to lunch afterward. And again, the compelling data points are when you ask about loneliness, when you ask about connectivity, when you ask about do you have the ability to talk to others, and do you feel like you have a friend in this world and someone to turn to? Those numbers are all up significantly, and I can't stress that enough. Again, there are always outliers, but almost all faiths, that are mainstream, have these positive goods to contribute to the public sphere.
Bill, as Sam is talking, something that stands out so strongly to me in a lot of the conversations we've had on this show, and especially in recent months, conversations about the well-being of men and boys, that's an active area of study for us and many other organizations as well, that so many of these things, I think, come back to the sense of connection and meaning and purpose, that there's a lot that government policy can do. That's, we work at a public policy think tank, right? We work in that space, but it seems like more and more a lot of the really intractable seeming problems in modern society are problems of meaning, of purpose, of connection, and where do I fit in my life, in society? What am I supposed to do? It seems to me that the presence of faith and religion in public life provides an answer to that, especially when it comes to, again, I think a lot about the mental health well-being question.
Right.
Is that the right way to think about it? How can we, I guess, bring that idea more into the kinds of public conversations we're having about these issues where it's currently absent?
I think part of the answer is that sometimes there's some paradoxes in religion that are a little odd for outsiders, but they're pretty powerful if you kind of see the way there's kind of a providential economy working. I mean, we talked about one earlier that children, of course, need parents who are supportive, but adults really benefit from having children as well. They change them. It's a remarkable thing that both grow from that interaction. The same thing we see happening with the idea of what we believe, a kind of the orthodoxy. Do I believe the right things? And orthopraxy. Am I doing the right things? They also sort of interact with each other. They sharpen our beliefs. They help us to discard things that are not true, particularly in the way that we see other people. And so what I mean by that is that then if people recognize that what's really happening in religious communities, I think some of the skepticism begins to disappear because, like Sam described, it's relatively obvious that there's an infusion of purpose and meaning in life. There is you are surrounded by people who are not just like-minded. That's somewhat beneficial, but they're like-minded, but not too like-minded, so that you can see there's different ways of seeing things. I love that. I think that's exactly where we see these benefits. And I might just add that there are some powerful data related to outcomes with less depression, less suicide, less anxiety. Some of these these are things we're hearing about constantly, and for people of faith that they're a tremendous benefit. Having said that, one thing I always worry about is that we don't make it sound like a kind of an emotional prosperity gospel if we just believe that everything goes great. It doesn't. And that's another powerful element of religion that I wish people maybe who didn't understand or don't appreciate the importance of faith could see, is that we will deal with some extremely challenging things, including depression and suicide and anxiety. But faith allows us to navigate those challenges in ways that I can't see any parallel in other kinds of settings. And so I hope that these kinds of discussions are precisely going to be the answer to the question you asked. How do we create more understanding? We'll talk more about what faith does for those who are religious.
Sam and Bill, we're about at time, so I want to ask one last question that's very direct to give our audience some talking points that they can use. And I'll start with you, Sam, and then Bill, I'll kind of give you the last word before we wrap up. But the question is this: if there's someone out there listening to this or watching this conversation and they're thinking, well, this makes sense to me, this is compelling, how do I go and talk about this with someone else who maybe doesn't believe in any kind of doctrinal set of teachings with respect to faith or religion, or doesn't practice a faith or religion, or otherwise someone who's maybe a little skeptical or critical of the role of faith in public life? Is there? I'm going to ask you to try and pick one talking point very briefly that either pick in one of the sections of family education and well-being or kind of one aggregate talking point. But if there's one key message that our audience can take and use in a conversation with someone who's maybe a little skeptical about the positive benefit of religion in public life, what's the one key thing they need to take away to use in that conversation? Sam, you first, and then Bill.
That is a great question. I don't know if I can answer it quickly. What I would say is invite them to dinner. The foundational thing for Jews and Judaism is talking. Let's have a meal together and start showing it to people. So I wouldn't give them an idea. I wouldn't give them a data point. Rather than telling them, I would show them. And I would say, welcome, come with me. And the first thing wouldn't necessarily be a service. It would be a community thing that we do. Something around a holiday, something about a festival, something about the Sabbath. That's communal, that's family focused, that's joyful, and that allows for introspection. So I know that's not exactly the right answer, or I'm not exactly answering your question, but I probably would not lead with, here's what religion does, why you should think about it. And I wouldn't tell them, I would show them, and I would say, welcome, let's take a look, see what you think. I've done that over the years, and to watch them become more engaged in these things than me is always a joy, and that happens all the time.
No, I love that. It goes back to the connection question. Bill, final word.
I think building on that, well, if I can slip an idea in addition to the one thing I will say, that people should read Sam's reports. He's a superb, excellent writer and researcher, and they'll learn a lot from that. But maybe I would just add, I thought that answer is exactly right. And one thing I think that people of faith could do is just to kind of express themselves as having found something that's beneficial to them. I think sometimes people find religion and religious people of faith off-putting because they feel that they're saying we have better. I don't know that that's really the claim. I think the claim is more we have something valuable, and I think the way that to introduce it is the way Sam described, by letting people come and see. But I think people of faith have a lot to offer, and can learn a lot from others as well, and that interaction will be a tremendous benefit to both.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description, and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.